There are times when we say, hey, go ahead and unmute, join us in speaking some words, and that's up to you as you want to participate. Please do that as you wish. And then finally, we use the chat box for a lot of important information, as I mentioned. So readings and song lyrics and announcements. So keep that open if you want to see those things. And welcome to our service.
And let us worship with one another today, making this ground sacred because we are together in community with one another.
We would like to extend an especially warm welcome to those who are here for the first time. So glad you found us and you're here. Our greeter is dropping our connection card into the chat box if you'd like to complete that and connect with our community. This caring, supportive community has a pastoral care committee who works closely with Reverend Laura to provide support and care and a listening ear. And so please fill out the pastoral care card that's being dropped into the chat now if you would like to have Reverend Laura or the care team reach out to you. There's also a link on our website for that. Our online services are intergenerational, and we have a religious exploration program, a wonderful program whose director, Rebecca Britt, is happy to hear from you. And her email is being put in the chat box now if you'd like to reach out to her. There's a lot happening here at South Valley, and the Happenings Weekly newsletter is the best, most up-to-date way to find out what is going on. So if you don't already receive that, please email Lori Quigley, whose email is being put in the chat right now as well. We're active on Facebook. We have a calendar on our website. So please do check into all of those ways to stay connected to this community or to begin to be connected to this community. Our worship today is an interesting new kind of worship. It's a question box service. And so it really depends on all of you to make it a really interesting, in-depth sermon time with Reverend Laura, because she's going to answer your questions. We'll ask you to put those questions in the chat box. And of course, these are the kind of questions that may not actually have one answer. These are kind of the deep spiritual questions that you might have, you've always wondered about, you would like her to reflect on. She will give her answer. It might not be the answer, because really we believe maybe there's multiple answers to these questions, right? So go ahead and start putting some of those in the chat box, some of those big questions that you may have. And then later in the service, Reverend Laura will answer some of those from her perspective. Next Sunday, May 2nd, is the annual Flower Communion. And we have found a creative way to continue that tradition where we all bring flowers in and they're placed on the altar and everyone takes a flower with them home. So how we'll do it this year is next Saturday between 1 and 3, please bring your flowers. And then the altar will be created. And then next Sunday at 1, after the worship, will be a playground celebration and blessing. And at that time, you can come to the back, see the new playground, which is amazing, gather some flowers and take those home. Our annual meeting is Sunday, May 16th at 12:30, also on Zoom. It's an important meeting to the life of the community, and we vote on new members to the board and committees, and we are presented with the budget. It's a very important meeting, so please do plan to attend. Anyone is welcome. Current members may vote on the issues. If you have questions, again, Reverend Laura is a resource, or our board president, Sophia Hawes-Tingy. And we'll now take a moment to share the warmth of community. So please do, this is a time to unmute yourselves if you'd like, and to say hello. And if you have a chalice or a candle that you'd like to use as a chalice lighting, we will do that immediately after, and you can stay unmuted for that part. So please go ahead and unmute yourselves. Let's say hello. Maybe you want to.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Happy spring.
Church.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning.
Nice to see you all.
Morning, everybody.
Hi.
Awesome. So good to hear your voices and see you.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and light our chalices and our candles at home. And we have our chalice lighting words that are being put in the chat box now. And we have gestures if you want to do those at home. And so let us say these words. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of truth, for the energy of action.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Dana Wright, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees here at South Valley Unitarian Universalist Society. My pronouns are she and her. Come, whoever you are welcome here. No matter your age, your size, the color of your eyes, your hair, your skin, you are welcome here. No matter your gender, whom you love, how you speak, or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. You are welcome here whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears in your eyes. You are welcome here. No matter what you have experienced in the past, no matter what awaits you in the future, you are welcome here. Whether you believe in God all of the time, or some of the time, or none of the time, you are welcome here. This is a community of open minds, loving hearts, and willing hands. You are welcome here at South Valley Unitarian Universalist Society.
I am the Reverend Laura Young, and my pronouns are she and her. It is good for us to be together. And it is, as Brenda said, such a joy to be sharing the sanctuary with other people now that vaccinations have again made that possible. I would also just continue to caution you and to hold space for those who are not yet able to become vaccinated or who may never be able to be vaccinated, that we continue to wear our masks when we are in mixed groups, and that we continue to be respectful and to care for one another in deep and informative and beautiful ways as we find our way in, through, outside, and beyond this pandemic. We are not quite there yet, but goodness, it is good to celebrate those little moments of return to some sense of more typical connection.
Okay.
As we gather this week, it is nice to be able to have a little bit of joy to share as we go into our call to worship, that the verdict from the Derek Chauvin trial was a moment that we can stand firm on as a nation, when we will not turn our eyes away from injustice, but we will turn our eyes towards what it looks like to have accountability and truthfulness in our justice system, so that everyone who is encountering one another can do so safely. And we stand firm in our commitments as Unitarian Universalists that a fair and just justice system is what we are all seeking and striving for. And we know that racial justice is not a 1 or 2 or 3 moment experience, but it is a lifetime, several lifetimes knitted together, all of our collective lifetimes. And it is up to all of us to continue to stand in that place of difficulty and uncertainty, and to knit together one another in a place where we can all come to a shared understanding of what it truly means to be a compassionate, loving, justice-rich nation. We have a long history in this country of missing the mark. And so it is so good to see that this week we got a little closer to making that mark. And our call to worship comes from within the African American community, and our Zoom run will be sharing it. And I'll let his words speak to the work that is yet to be done by all of us, all the living generations collectively, as we seek to find a new way forward.
Everything. America, just sit quietly, listen, take it in.
When I'm up here on stage, they call me Brandon. When I'm with my homies, they call me B, and when I'm with the ladies, let's just say they call me Taken because I'm already happily spoken for. But when I'm back at home, my mama, she called me Pookie. And though I'm not afraid to admit it, my mother calls me Pookie at like the most inopportune moments. For instance, today, on my way here to America's Got Talent, my mom screamed out the front door, "Make sure that you call me when you get there." Pookie. And like, I get why my mother says it out of courtesy, but to be real, I don't understand why my mom's so concerned with my safety, praying for me as I leave the house on a daily, because I'm just a young man who has faith in Jesus. The same way that stars have faith that space will protect them from this galactic bully we call gravity, who longs to turn their stardust splendid spectacle for passerbyers to watch in awe of its depth. So yes, I never really understood the issue. And then I went on Facebook, and I realized that my mama loved me the same way every mother loved their son, fearfully, Because normally, death don't really bother me. I mean, I'm from Southside Stockton. I'm all too familiar with how some family reunions only ever take place on graveyard grass and how a hole can be a safe haven for a soul in this mortal game of hide and go seek. But there is something so different about Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and the countless others. And as I stared at that screen, I couldn't help but think I was looking at a mirror image of myself being choked out for merely existing, or for daring to be more than 3/5 of what them folk thought them to be. Or maybe it was simply due to their hue, and in that moment I better understood my black mother's greatest fear was every time I leave her home, on the other side of my phone will no longer be her son, will be America's next most popular hashtag, accompanied by a video of her young star being gunned down by gravity as my stardust has turned splendid spectacle for passerbyers to watch in awe of my death. So yes, my mother's greatest fear is that I won't return home breathing, blood pulsing through these veins enough to still be her Pookie. And my mama warned me, son, don't you dare get caught at the wrong place at the wrong time with that wrong-colored skin, because those 3 strikes, they lead to pine box convictions, and I need you to return home my Pookie again. So dear mom, I promise you this, I will do everything in my power to make it back home to you. But if I don't, just know you was the very last thing on my mind. And I will always, always be your Pookie.
Brand
Let's just take a moment just to be with one another. We are together in this journey, each doing our part, collectively standing in that place of solidarity. The work will not be accomplished in our lifetime, but a lifetime is enough to do something to move this dialogue forward. Let's sing. Let's sing with one another for a little bit. Travis is going to lead us in our gathering hymn, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in a holy place, our heart is in a holy place. We are blessed with love and amazing grace. Our heart is in a holy place. When we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed, every kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, our heart is in a holy place. We are blessed with love and amazing grace. Our heart is in a holy place. When we tell our story from deep inside, when we listen with a loving mind, when we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, our heart is in a holy place. We are blessed with love and amazing grace. Our heart is in a holy place. When we share the silence of sacred space, the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith. Then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Grace Burns. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm one of the RE teachers, and today I'm going to read a story called Going Places. Raphael had been waiting all year long for the Going Places contest, a chance to build a go-kart, race it, and win. When their teacher announced who would like the first kit, Raphael's hand shot up. The rest of the class watched enviously as Raphael walked back to his seat with a kit. Miss Shonda assured them, "Don't worry, you'll all be getting one." And they're all exactly alike. The kit came with a set of precise instructions. That made Raphael happy. He was very good at following directions. Raphael hammered, glued, nailed, and assembled his kit. His go-kart looked just like the one in the directions, and he was feeling quite proud. Raphael wondered how his classmate Maya was doing. She lived right next door. He peered over the fence. "Hey, Maya, you haven't even started?" Maya didn't respond. She was so intent on watching the bird in front of her and quickly sketching it that she didn't even notice Raphael. Then she just put down her pencil and stared at the bird dreamily. Raphael shrugged and let her be. The next morning, Raphael checked back in to see how Maya was doing. "Wow, what is that?" he asked. Maya grinned. "You like it?" Raphael responded slowly. "Yeah, extremely cool. But, Maya, there's just one little problem. That's not a go-kart." Maya smiled. Who said it had to be a go-kart? Raphael was confused. The set of instructions inside the box were for a go-kart. But then again, they didn't say it had to be a go-kart. He looked again at Maya's contraption. After a moment, he grinned. "I get it. Hey, Maya, I really want to win this race. The instructions never said we couldn't team up either." And so they did, working late into the evening. The next day, everyone gathered for the big race. Each go-kart was a perfect replica of the other. Except one. One of the kids laughed. "Looks like you had trouble with the going places instructions. You're going places all right. You're going to lose." Maya and Raphael didn't even have time to respond because the announcer's big boomy voice called out, "Attention racers, start your engines. 4, 3, 2, 1. A buzzer sounded. And they're off. While all the other go-karts disappeared into a cloud of dust, Maya just sat there in their motionless vehicle. Raphael shouted over the roar of engines and cheering crowds, "Maya, what are we waiting for?" "No worries, Raphael," Maya answered. "Flaps down, throttle up." And now they took off into the air. The other contestants looked up in amazement. Maya and Raphael hovered and then sped past them all. Before long, Maya and Raphael coasted across the finish line to the cheers of the waiting crowd. They kept rolling clear across the race grounds. Maya slammed the brakes, stopping just short of the lake at the edge of the school field. Raphael noticed a startled frog leap from a lily pad and dive into the water. He raised his eyebrow and looked at Maya. She smiled. Raphael, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Raphael just nodded. And that is the end.
Thank you, Grace. That was awesome. Oh, it's time now for our offertory. And I have here our offertory basket that you may not have seen for a while. I thought it'd be nice to see. This community, our church, and its many ministries are only made possible by the gifts you give of your time, your talent, and your treasure. Many of you pledge monthly to support our work, and for this we're grateful. Your gifts help ensure we're able to live our values of love and justice in the world outside. So we now use Breeze to collect Sunday offerings online, and the link is being put in the chat box now. Part of our ministry at South Valley includes sharing this Sunday worship offering with a charitable organization that aligns with our goals. And so today, your gift will be shared with Tree Utah. Since 1988, Tree Utah has worked to improve Utah's quality of life for our generation, but future generations, by enhancing our environment through tree planting and stewardship and education. And specifically, our offerings will go toward Retree Utah to plant trees for the hundreds lost in public spaces in September 2020 windstorms. So please do give generously. And together, please say the words for our offering. We are this church. We are its hands, its heart, its voice. Together, we share the wealth of this community and sustain it with our gifts.
Everything I've learned. Is that all right?
You're muted.
I don't think I am.
Go ahead and start again, Travis. It sounded okay on my side.
Okay. On the Holy Mountain, take 2. Everything I've learned, every choice I've made, brought me to this holy mountain. If I step ahead, will I fall to earth, or will angels' arms carry on? Everything I've learned, every choice I've made, brought me to this holy mountain. If I step ahead, will I fall to earth, or will angels' arms carry on? Or will I fall like leaves on autumn breezes, or fly up like cherry blossoms carried on the wind that holds the springtime in its slender hand? might fall like leaves on autumn breezes, or fly up like cherry blossoms carried on the wind that holds the springtime in its slender hand. Everything I've learned, every choice I've made, brought me to this holy mountain. If I step ahead, will I fall to earth, or will angels' arms bear me up?
For all that we have received and all we have found the courage to give, may we be truly grateful. May these gifts be a blessing on South Valley and on Tree, Utah. At this time, we invite all of those gathered in our virtual community to participate in a time of sharing personal joys and sorrows, for joys and sorrows in those in-between spaces. May the tenderness of this community seep in and touch you in your heart. Join me now in a moment of quiet reflection, meditation, or prayer. Spirit of life that comes to us up through the greening of the hills, the blowing of the wind, the arrival of those birds that wintered elsewhere. We sink our feet into the grass of this good green earth and are grateful for just our animal beingness on this day. We send our collective concern and turn it into a prayer that is heard throughout the whole world, both in joy and in solidarity and in determination that justice is a heartbeat of this world that is stronger than anything that would deter us from moving forward towards justice. We continue to send our care and our love for those first responders, those nurses and doctors, physicians and caretakers who are on the front lines of COVID-19, continuing to fight for the lives of those who are inflicted and affected by COVID-19. We send our love and our support in their direction, hoping that our collective care arrives like a whisper on their hearts, helping them to take one more step forward. And we give thanks for this community here at South Valley, that despite it all, is still strong and is still here. Gratitude is one of those things that we can always touch just by breathing a little bit more. And I invite you just to breathe here with me into the collective space and to be pulling the blessings forward by our collective care and cooperation. Let us be silent with one another. Okay, now it's time for the main event. Your hardest, most naughty theological questions.
So please do put those questions in the chat box. And we did ask for some questions ahead of time and have a couple to start with, but please get those going in the chat as well. Reverend Laura,
Yes.
is there a God?
Don't softball me from the very beginning. That is such a complicated question, and I
Yes.
love it. And it's one that doesn't really have a specific answer. What I would point us to is the reality that there are many, many ways to engage with and to find a healthy spirituality in this world. And that's part of what we really seep into and believe in as Unitarian Universalists, that there are many ways. One thing that occurs to me is a couple different things I'll share about that. One is just a historical note that the earliest Christians were actually considered atheists because they didn't believe in the Roman pantheon. They believed in a singular God. And that was considered heretical and atheistic. And yet today, it's been quite the opposite, that we would consider someone to be an atheist who didn't believe in a singular God. And so there's just this very rich theological and historical tradition in which every single human being that's ever lived and breathed on the planet has to come to their own decision and their own grounding. And that's what we're here about here at South Valley and in UU communities, is to foster a place where you feel safe to ask and answer those questions. And to come to answers for yourself, and to then also know that those answers can change. So of course, I've made it no secret that I myself am a theist, but I would never think to ask anybody else in this congregation or anyone else who walks beside me in this life to change their mind because of what I find to be fruitful for my spirituality. So my role is to help everyone to find their own spirituality.
Mhm. And Sutton actually has a follow-up question of how do you define God?
Can you define the word God? So I had a yoga teacher years ago who said that if you're not comfortable with understanding God in a traditional theistic sort of Western Christian context, that one way you could do it would be to break it down into an acronym called GOD, which is the guiding, ordering, and directing force of the world. So I can just leave it there, that you can interpret that however you want.
Maureen asks, does evil need to exist in the world in order for goodness to exist?
I think I'm going to sidestep that and say, it doesn't matter if it does or doesn't need to exist. The truth is that evil does exist in the world. And that is something that we've kind of struggled with in Unitarian Universalism. We tend to be a very optimistic, very sort of postmodern kind of, I see a funny question in that box. We'll get to that in a little bit. So that the question of evil is something that we really do need to grapple with as Unitarian Universalists. We've tended to shy away from that. And I think we could really do some work, both as a denomination and as an individual community, to really think about what does constitute evil and how can we have a robust response to that which is really destructive and harmful in the world.
Yeah. The funny question is naughty or naughty?
Yes. And I meant KNOTTY. Though, of course, sexuality is definitely a part of our spirituality. So if you have those kinds of questions, you can try and ask them, and we'll see if it's a publicly available response at this point.
Well, so what is the purpose of having a spiritual connection?
Well, I think I would say that religion and spirituality are two very sort of different things. Religion is sort of the cultural trappings of what we're about. It's how we gather together in community. And spirituality is that sort of more individual understanding, that personal quest that we undertake to find meaning and purpose in our lives. So the purpose of having a spiritual connection is to not miss out on the good stuff. I would say, to not miss out on the beauty and the joy. And you don't have to define that as spiritual, because there's a lot of ways in which language has become loaded in our culture. And so I don't want to make anyone think that they have to adopt one kind of language or another. But I would also say, don't let those people who have defined a piece of language in a way that doesn't work for you have ownership of that. Don't let the religious right or those who are more conservative own the words like God or spirit or spirituality or salvation or liberation. Find and make your own meaning within that.
Yeah.
Because we don't have to cede that ground to anybody.
Yeah, that's like radical. That's being radical right there.
Yeah. We are a heretical tradition by all means.
And so that last question was from Sophia. And then Roseanne Coleman is asking, what about, and speaking of language, kind of the language of God, the language of all kinds of things toward the masculine now. There was a time when it was feminine. What happened? What?
Patriarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, patriarchy happened. So within the Christian tradition, because I see that there's a question of that within that question. So it's there hasn't been a time really where we haven't, in modern, in the last 5,000 years, which is what we have sort of more written records around, there hasn't been a time where we've been free of patriarchy. So to try to separate out religion and spirituality from patriarchy is really a constructive effort. So like feminist theologians have examined the biblical texts, and they can find sort of whispers of feminine language. So like in Isaiah, there's some feminine language. Some of the Psalms have feminine language. And so you can unearth those pieces, but it's hard because patriarchy has a death grip on our spirituality. In the early Christian communities, women very much played a role as both apostles and teachers. And unfortunately, that was suppressed, as we all know. And there are still some traditions to this day that do not recognize women as able to be teachers and as spiritual leaders. We're obviously not one of those, since we are both up here together,
Yes,
engaging in this conversation.
but maybe speak to, it was also a journey for Unitarian Universalists as well.
Unitarian Universalists were the first congregations to ordain women in the 1830s. And those women like Olympia Brown and others had a very difficult struggle with that. They often had a very tough time finding congregations, and they went west. And so for a while there was a lot of congregations in the Midwest that were led by women. They were often very small congregations that the men didn't want to go to. But they held those positions. And there was a real flourishing in the 1830s around that. And then all the women were kicked out. And there were no women in the denomination as ordained women until the 1960s. So there was almost 100-year period where there were no women ordained in the movement. And the women who came back in the 1950s and 60s had a very difficult time making headway into that. And the same is true for people of color. There have been little moments where there was more acceptance, and then our history is really complicated. In that respect.
I just think it's always good, we're the same as everyone, and so not to dismiss that, and we continue to struggle in various ways, and that's just how it goes with humans.
We try to do the right thing.
There's a question from Lucy. What does it mean we are one being, or what does it mean to you?
We are one being.
We are one.
Well, I tend to think of that from like a scientific perspective, that our DNA really is shared not just within the human family, but in all of the life that is on this earth. What separates us from an oak tree is just a few aspects of our DNA, and that we really truly are really connected. We live in an ecosystem. The health of that ecosystem depends on how we all participate in that. So I don't have a supernatural response to that. I tend to be very much like the more we know about how our ecosystem works, the more we understand that we are not separate, that those teachings that, if you go way back to Genesis that taught us that we were to have dominion over the world, that's actually like, in some ways has been interpreted as a break from what we naturally actually truly are, which is interconnected with one another.
And could it be interpreted as stewardship rather than taking over?
I think that there are a lot of ecofeminists and other liberation theologians who have really pointed us back to that text and said, that was really meant to be about stewardship and not about ownership. And we've had a really hard time, I think, as a Western culture, coming to terms with that. But I think with climate change, we're finding ourselves deeply challenged around that.
So behind us are some sacred texts. We have a Bible that was gifted from Hank Carlson, if anyone remembers him, an early member. We have the Holy Quran. We have another Bible that is Reverend Mora's, and then the Book of Mormon as a sampling of all the possible sacred texts that are around. And we have a statue to remind us of Buddhism. And so we're trying to be inclusive here. What can we learn from these? How do we take from these something useful?
I think our relationship in the United States and as Unitarian Universalists is really different. Our relationship with the Bible is really different than maybe other cultures. So I have maybe a couple different answers. When it comes to sacred texts that are not the Bible, I think we're called to be really, as with all things, like really deeply respectful of the culture and the traditions that have produced those texts, and to not go into those texts and draw from them some sort of wisdom, and say, oh, this piece of wisdom is so wonderful, but to not take with it some of the other pieces that go with it. For example, I have watched over the years, like in yoga classes or in meditation groups, sometimes people will sort of take from Buddhist or Hindu texts and apply it to Western culture. And I think that really disrespects those texts that really came up and through and out of those cultures. And so I think we need to be really careful with those texts, to appreciate them, but to really try to keep them in the context. And that context also really applies to the Bible as well, which of course, in many ways is the text of Western culture. Whether we like it or not, or whether we know anything about it or not, it is something that is underneath and runs through our culture. It shapes those stories of salvation and redemption and the origin stories from the book of Genesis. Those stories are sort of foundational within our culture. And so we have a response and a reaction to them as, people who live in the United States who maybe come from a Western tradition. And my personal, my favorite classes in seminary were the biblical classes, because I learned to read those texts in a different way. They became less about some sort of doctrine that I was supposed to come to some prefixed answer, to a wonderful reflection of the complexity of human life. One of the ways that I understand the Bible now is it's the story, especially the Hebrew Bible, which is the Old Testament. We call it the Hebrew Bible now. That's both a theological document, but it's also the history of the ancient Near East people who would become modern day Jews. And so it is interaction with the God of their understanding. And if you can read those texts within the context and the time that they are in, they're fascinating. They're trying to figure out, like, does God abandon us in the midst of travesty? Is God still with us? What does it mean to believe in God? What does it mean to be chosen or not chosen? What does it mean to be a people of suffering and to seek liberation? Those are the same questions that we're asking today. We're asking those questions today. And there are also parts of the Christian texts, both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Testament, that are really complicated, that treat women as chattel, that, tell us how to own other human beings for the purpose of labor, that tell us, women should be silent in church. And those are not to be shied away from, but to be engaged with as part of who we have been as human beings. Yeah. There's xenophobia. A lot of xenophobia in the Bible. And we can't just wash those away. And there's anti-LGBTQ, or actually there's not anti-LGBTQ, it's just been interpreted as anti-LGBTQ. But in fact, actually, it's kind of a fun, maybe we'll do a study sometime about queer theology in the Bible and all the gay relationships that are actually in the Bible that have been suppressed. Yeah, David and his cupbearer is quite a delightful story if you ever want to read that. They loved each other quite a bit.
Oh, that warms my heart. Okay. There are a couple of, we'll just take a couple more questions. There's a couple of them about Jesus. So speaking of
Jonathan and David, there it is. Jonathan and David.
Oh,
that was the story.
Okay, Sophia gave us Jonathan and David. Okay, so a couple of things about Jesus. Did Jesus have supernatural powers? How do we move from needing Christ and Jesus and atonement to get through depression and other difficult times? Or maybe we can use that connection somehow. What are your thoughts on Jesus?
Oh, many.
Just a few, just a small question.
Gosh, it is, Jesus lived so long ago, and there are so many layers to the story. And to say whether or not Jesus was divine or not divine, or to say he has supernatural powers or he didn't, to me is almost a false sense of questions, because the world that Jesus was born into was pre-scientific. They had a very different cosmology, and what they expected of themselves and one another as humans was far different than what we understand and expect of one another as human beings. And while there are things that carry over, a lot of people in Jesus's time were considered miracle workers. They didn't have medicine. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't understand that, the earth rotated around the sun rather than the other way around. So it's almost just like an impossible question to answer in that respect.
Yeah.
But I'll try, and I'll say, if it works for you to have Jesus be supernatural, then by all means, go for it. And if it doesn't work for you, that's okay too. I'd be very heretical in that respect.
That's a very
this
answer.
This is why I probably couldn't be a Christian minister. God help me, we probably shouldn't put this one up on YouTube.
Okay, our last question brings us back around to our call and opening of worship. And it brings it back to us specifically. Cole is asking, why does South Valley have so few BIPOC members? Because she has been part of, as many of us, of doing social justice work, of being in the community, of trying hard. And in fact, it's as she mentions, a UU congregation in general, UUA in general, concern. Yeah, Utah she is acknowledging that there are few Black people in Utah, 15% Latinos though, right? And of course, just in general, we would hope that we would be a congregation or denomination that would be attractive to all people. So again, a naughty question, KNOTTY. Yeah.
There are a lot of reasons, I think, why Unitarian Universalism has not been diverse, because most congregations, as you point out, are not all that politically diverse. They're not religiously all that diverse. They're not, or theologically that diverse. Well, they are maybe theologically diverse, and they're definitely not racially diverse. And I think what I would call us to as a congregation is the work that we're engaged with anti-racism is not about rounding our pews. And so that we can sort of check that box off and say, well, look, we've accomplished something. Because people of color are not objects to be acquired. So we have to do the work to become anti-racist, just as this congregation did the work to become LGBTQ affirming. We have about a third of our congregation is LGBTQ, and that didn't happen overnight or by accident. That was a lot of dedication and a lot of work to get there. I think the same is true for anti-racism work. And we may never get to a place where we have a diverse congregation representation on a Sunday morning. But what we can do is we can begin to think about how are we recreating cultures and practices that make people of color not feel welcome? How can we build partnership? How can we build partnership with organizations that are engaged in similar work with us? And then I would one last little piece I would add is we're also not really that good as Unitarian Universalists about evangelizing our own faith.
Yeah.
And that's probably part of it as well.
Especially here in this culture where people have felt evangelized. They're nervous to speak, I think, even though we have good things to offer. Yeah.
So we'll be working on that.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for these excellent questions. Thank you, Reverend Laura, for giving us your thoughts on them and jumping in and, wow, giving us a lot to think about, actually.
Very good. So we're going to give everyone a moment here to, if you want to just turn your cameras off and just have just a little moment just for reflection and maybe write down some questions that you have. I encourage you to continue to submit those questions to me via email. It'll fill my fodder while I'm away on study leave this summer as I plan worship for the coming year. So let's give you 1 minute with your cameras off just to write down those questions. Okay, welcome back.
Our closing reading is from Rumi. Keep walking, though there's no place to get to. Don't try to see through the distances. That's not for human beings. Move within, but don't move the way fear makes you move. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground.
Hey, we're going to do our final closing hymn, and Rick is going to play for us in the sanctuary. We'll build a land, and the lyrics will be in the chat box.
Brenda, do you want to sing along?
Okay. Let us now extinguish our communal chalice. You are invited to unmute yourselves if you'd like, stand if you'd like, and let's say our chalice extinguishing words together. We extinguish the chalice, but not the warmth of community, the light of truth, or the energy of action. We hold each other in our hearts until we meet again.
Closing music is one of my favorite pieces. One of my favorite pieces ever. It was written back in 1717 by François Couperin, and it just seemed really appropriate to a service that had lots of questions and answers. And the name of the piece is Les Barricades Mystérieuses, or the Mysterious Barricades.
As you go forth from this place, may those questions that are ever bubbling to the surface of your heart come out through your fingertips and be a light to the world. Do not let anyone tell you that questions with no answers have to be answered in this lifetime or the next. May you sparkle with those questions and delight in the wonder that is being truly human, both in this community and in all the days of your life. Go forth and be a blessing. Enjoy the weather that's coming tomorrow, which is rain, which I'm excited about. And we'll see you in about 10 minutes for our social hour.